Thank you a lot. America is back. So many things to cover, so little time. First up, we've got the vice presidential debate in just a couple of hours, the first and only face-off of its kind. Some are saying the most important vice presidential debate in U.S. history. Mike Pence, a white evangelical Christian in his early 60s on one side, Kamala Harris, a woman of color in her 50s with a long career as a prosecutor and a senator on the other. Should make for a very interesting night and probably very different from the debate that we saw between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Ugly and nasty. Steve Farnsworth is standing by in Washington. Corey Crowley is in Dallas, Texas. Corey, let me start with you today on this and how high you think the stakes are for the debate tonight.
Well, I think they're extremely high, Todd. And the challenge for Pence, I think, is going to be able to be getting onto the offense. There's a lot to be defensive about if you're part of the Trump-Pence administration right now with COVID and the president's reaction to his having it and all the people in the White House circles getting sick. And so I think a lot of the debate will be centered around that. I think Pence is going to try to push back, but a lot of the lines of attack that the Trump-Pence campaign have had against Biden and Harris revolve around Biden's family and Hunter Biden and the kind of scruples or lack thereof in the term that Biden was vice president and served as a senator. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they push back directly on Kamala Harris. But I think that he knows that he's got his match cut out for him. She's an articulate individual who has a command of the issues and, as you said, was a prosecutor. And a win for her will be if she can make this debate about law and order and about making the Biden campaign not look weak on what we see happening in cities across America with lawless unrest.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm curious about your read on Kamala Harris. You know, the question always for women in politics is sort of, you know, how assertive to be without, unfortunately, being harshly judged for that. And, you know, there are certainly many opportunities here for her when it comes to Mike Pence, who has been front and center in the Trump administration's handling of COVID-19. How much do you think she should go on the attack?
Well, I think it is important to define the issues. There is absolutely a double standard for women in politics, and this will be a challenge going forward for Kamala Harris and the women who come after her in politics. But be that as it may, the challenge here is to create an environment where the Trump administration has to answer for COVID-19. Not only the issue of more than 200,000 dead, one of the worst performances of any country in the world in terms of the management of this disease, but the decisions even now by the vice president to show up at this debate. An argument should be made that he should be in quarantine because of his connection to the administration in the wake of the president's diagnosis. And getting back to the president, there's also the issue of him going into the Oval Office today. He doesn't seem to be isolating. He seems to be infecting, or at least risking the infection of other people around him. It's not a story that you have to be all that aggressive, a prosecutor, to demonstrate that the Trump administration has mishandled COVID as for the country and even for themselves.
Yeah, it's a good point. And we also know that even the Biden campaign has certainly indicated that, you know, they've tried to put Joe Biden, Corey, front and center in a lot of the last couple of months' coverage. I know you yourself on this program have said, where is Kamala Harris? And, you know, to a certain extent, perhaps there was some worries that some of those Republican line of attacks, that this woman was, you know, somehow a Trojan horse for the left, that Joe Biden wouldn't really be running things in a Biden White House. Instead, it would be Kamala Harris who would be controlling things. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why they've tried to put Joe Biden sort of front and center. I'm curious, you know, what sort of tightrope you think she's going to be walking. What's your perspective?
Well, that's a difficult challenge for every presidential ticket, Todd, is trying to decide how much you put the vice president out there. You don't want him to outshine the person at the top of the ticket. You certainly don't want your own voters to start wishing the ticket were flipped. And I think in this case, for Democrats, there could be a little bit of that regret if you saw too much of Harris out there. Like I said earlier, she's articulate, she knows how to make an argument, and she's a breath of fresh air when it comes to kind of the politics of the Biden-Trump generation. And but I think you're going to see her stand her own ground tonight. She's also not an intimidatable person. I could see, even if their own campaign comm staff tried to tell her to be a little more mild-mannered, that she's going to do her own thing. That's how she's made it as far as she has. And oftentimes what staff forget on these campaigns is they're advising candidates, particularly before debates, is that these folks have good instincts of their own. They made it this far in politics. Certainly to rise to be on a presidential ticket as a woman and a minority woman is an extraordinary accomplishment. You don't get there if you're not a talented individual.
And looming over it all, you've got Mike Pence, you've got Kamala Harris, but is Donald Trump, of course. And we'll be watching. And we know the president was in the Oval Office today, arguably not following protocols. At one point, there was a Marine Guard stationed outside, which is an indicator the president is inside working as well. And so, this whole debate will be overshadowed by Donald Trump's handling of this, his own COVID diagnosis, his promise to be at the debate next week, regardless of his own diagnosis as well. Steve, again, how do you sort of navigate all of that? What are voters supposed to take away from it?
Well, if the president has really no alternative, this conversation tonight and in the weeks ahead will be about COVID. And the mistake I think that the Trump administration is making with respect to COVID is not trying to limit this conversation. By refusing to say, for example, the last time that the president received a negative test, there's some concern that perhaps he was potentially able to infect people at the last debate. That really continues this story for another day. By meeting with other people in the White House, the spread of COVID-19 will continue. By not talking about allowing full contact tracing for people who were at the Supreme Court rollout where some people might have been infected. Again, you create a one-day story and you extend it into a one-week story and now into a second-week story. This is media management 101, and the Trump administration, for all of the president's ability to command the conversation on Twitter, is really not doing this well. Every day that the conversation is about COVID is a day that Trump gets further behind in this country. It's not smart politics for the Trump campaign to take this situation and stretch it out the way that they've been doing this week.
All right, we just want to show our viewers as well this poll that came out recently from the Wall Street Journal and NBC News, which shows that Joe Biden has opened up a 14-point spread between himself and Donald Trump. And again, this is a poll, 800 voters, conducted September the 30th to October the 1st. I'm curious, Corey, in your mind, whether this means that Donald Trump could well be heading for a political disaster on November the 3rd.
Well, we've talked about this before, and I think what you have to remember is national polls don't matter. We hand out electoral votes state by state, so you've got to look at these key states and those polls. But if you dig down into those, they're equally as troubling. My home state of Iowa, that Donald Trump won handily, a new poll this week shows him down 5 to Joe Biden. Wisconsin, where he surprised Hillary Clinton with an upset, he's now down 2 today. And I'm down in Dallas, as you noted, in the great state of Texas this week. And a new poll here shows it a dead heat in Texas. I mean, this should be a Republican landslide down here. And it looks like it could potentially be a neck-and-neck race. And to make matters worse, there are key Senate races in every single one of these battleground states this year. And with Trump being weak at the top of the ticket, he's absolutely sinking Republican, my party's prospects of maintaining control in the United States Senate, which is even more devastating than losing the White House.
Last word goes to you, Steve. When you look at those poll numbers, and really they have been similar to what we've seen for months now, although that's pretty extreme, 14 points. What's your takeaway?
Well, again, it takes us back to COVID. I think the big challenge that Donald Trump has is trying to convince senior citizens, those people particularly vulnerable to COVID infection, that he is handling this well. This is an economic crisis. It's a healthcare crisis. But remember, even for families who have not suffered from somebody who's had COVID, there's still the fear that somebody in their family will get it. And then the effect of millions of Americans being on the equivalent of house arrest month after month, because there was not a significant progress made with respect to this treatment. It's a very, very tough situation. Presidents are evaluated on what they've done. And if the conversation is about COVID, that's terrible news for Donald Trump.
Gentlemen, good to see the two of you. I hope to talk to you on the flip side of this debate as well. We appreciate it in the meantime.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Okay, Steve Farns with Corey Crowley. And a reminder, we are going to have extensive coverage coming up tonight live on the U.S. vice presidential debate. Mike Pence versus Kamala Harris, starting at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 Pacific, right here on CTV News Channel and streaming live at ctvnews.ca. We'll be right back.